The sky that day was as somber as everyone at Hannah's funeral. The clouds were heavy, the air bleak. A profound silence filled the church. Some people held tissues, while others, eyes brimming, recalled the beautiful moments they'd shared with Hannah. A gentle breeze rustled, the leaves on the trees whispering as if nature itself was paying its last respects. Then, an unexpected sound broke the silence. It was the voice of Duke, Hannah's loyal dog. He began to bark incessantly. He wasn't just any dog, he'd always been an inseparable part of Hannah's life. Now, before everyone's eyes, his gaze fixed on the coffin, his barks grew increasingly vehement. People began to look at each other, bewildered and uneasy. "What does he see?" they whispered. Some fidgeted, pacing back and forth, but they couldn't look away either. Duke's barking escalated, as if he were trying to warn them about something. Duke was an intelligent dog, everyone in the village knew that. His reputation had almost surpassed the love they held for him. It was as if he had a sensitivity beyond human comprehension. Some children, seeing him there, had their hairs standing on end. They remembered those eerie stories about dogs sensing things humans couldn't. What was Duke trying to tell them? It was clear he knew something. Something that bothered even the adults. But no one dared to say it out loud. The fact he'd fixed his gaze on a specific point indicated that something was wrong there. At that moment, some adults approached Duke, trying to calm him down. However, he continued barking relentlessly, his gaze locked directly on the coffin. There was something in his demeanor, in his almost palpable determination, that made even the most skeptical hesitate. Curiosity filled the air, and everyone wanted to understand what he was trying to convey. Father Michael stood at the head of the coffin. He noticed all eyes had turned to him and the dog. Trying to suppress his agitation, he took a deep breath and motioned for the people to sit back down. But the barking didn't stop. The father realized, with a forced and uncomfortable smile, that something strange was unfolding, that Duke's gaze was insisting that no one ignore what was happening. He cautiously approached Duke, speaking in a soothing tone. "Easy, Duke, it's all right," he said. But still, Duke kept barking, as if warning about something horrible that no one else could see. The father carefully reached out to pet the dog's head, but Duke recoiled and emitted a low growl, his gaze never leaving the coffin. The father began to sweat, noticing that everyone in the church was watching his every move, wiping his brow. "He's just a dog," he said, letting out a nervous laugh, trying to convince people to return to the ceremony, but deep down, even he seemed disturbed, as if he was aware that something bigger was at play, something Duke was insistent on exposing. Some people noticed that the father was avoiding looking directly at the coffin, as if he didn't want to see what Duke saw. "I wonder if he knows something, too," an old woman whispered to her friend with suspicious eyes. Others were beginning to feel an odd shiver, as if something invisible and unexplainable was there. Curious and a bit scared, the children moved closer to their parents, holding their hands tightly. Realizing that the unease was only growing, Father Michael raised his voice and said firmly, "Please, someone take that dog outside." But Duke refused to leave. He stood there, barking insistently and looking at the coffin, as if he needed to deliver an urgent message. And the mystery, instead of dissipating, only grew among those at the funeral. Amid all of this, there was a man that few people knew. He looked out of place, but in a perfect position to witness what was happening. His name was David. He was a newcomer to the village, but for some reason, he had a special affection for Hannah, even without knowing her well. David had an observant nature and a restless curiosity. Solving mysteries had always been his passion. When he noticed Duke's unusual behavior, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. He looked at Duke and then at the coffin. He realized that the dog wasn't barking for no reason. Slowly, he stood up, adjusted his jacket, and walked towards the dog. All eyes turned to him. They were curious, wondering what this enigmatic man, a virtual stranger, would do. "Hello, little fella," David murmured, crouching down next to Duke. "What are you trying to show us?" Hearing David's calm voice, Duke paused his barking for a moment, as if assessing the man in front of him. His eyes shone with a mixture of intelligence, fear, and hope, as if he were asking for help. David recognized the intensity of that look, and then turned his attention to the direction of the dog's gaze, towards the coffin. A chill ran down his spine, as if something was compelling him to uncover what was really going on there. The people in the church started whispering, confused and curious. "Leave the dog alone," said one of the men, trying to break the moment. But David simply shook his head. "I think Duke is trying to tell us something," he replied. He kept looking intently at the coffin and added, "Maybe we should listen to him." Without any further hesitation, David moved closer to Duke, and in a low voice, he said, "Come on, boy, what's bothering you? Show me." Duke, as if understanding that David was there to help him, wagged his tail slightly. Then he stopped barking and started carefully walking towards the coffin, sniffing the floor, as if leading David to a secret that only he knew. As David and Duke got closer to the coffin, neighbors started whispering among themselves about the legendary sixth sense of animals, remembering stories about dogs and cats being able to sense presences, dangers, and even supernatural events that no human had previously noticed. Duke's unsettling behavior had everyone disturbed, and David suggested that perhaps the dog was perceiving something that was beyond people's ability to see. The air had become even heavier, and people were wondering in silence. Was Duke seeing something supernatural, or was there a deeper mystery surrounding Hannah's death? Father Michael was beginning to feel the situation getting out of control. He took a deep breath, adjusted his cassock, and cast a stern glance around. With firm steps, he walked to the center of the church and raised his hands, asking for silence. "Please, everyone, calm down," he said, his voice trembling, trying to sound firm but revealing his nervousness. "We are gathered here to pay our last respects to Hannah, whom we all loved very much." The father shot a piercing look at David, who was still standing next to Duke, trying to decipher what the dog was trying to show. "It is inappropriate for anyone to come in here and cause such a disturbance during such a sensitive time," the father continued, now in a louder tone. Some people in the church nodded in agreement, but others were looking at the father with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Why was he so nervous? Why was he in such a hurry to end this situation? Then the father pointed directly at David and said, "What you are doing is disrespectful to Hannah." He spoke in a louder and harsher tone. "Leave that dog alone and stop distracting everyone with this nonsense." David, feeling the weight of the father's words, stood firm. There was something in the father's insistent demeanor, in his exaggerated haste to calm the situation, that heightened David's suspicions. Next to him, Duke emitted a low growl, as if he didn't like the father's tone. Realizing he was losing control, the father insisted, almost pleading, "Please, let no one allow Hannah's memory to be tainted by this behavior. Let's go back to our main purpose, to pray for her soul and eternal peace." But for many, peace seemed more distant with each passing moment. The father's words were anxious, but for those who were observing closely, the sweat on his brow and the slight tremble in his hands told a different story. A heavy silence fell over the place, and everyone was waiting with anticipation for David's next move. Sensing the father's unease and his desperate attempt to end the conversation as quickly as possible, David decided to ask the question that everyone was afraid to hear. With a sharp voice, and his gaze fixed on the father, he asked, "Father Michael, how exactly did Hannah die?" The church erupted into commotion. Whispers grew louder, and some people looked at each other, amazed by David's audacity. Father Michael's eyes widened, visibly shaken. He had already told everyone that Hannah had died peacefully in her bed, while sleeping, but at that moment, David's question echoed in the church like a stone thrown into a calm lake, creating waves of uncertainty. "What do you mean? How did she die?" the father replied, now clearly defensive. "I myself found her in her bed. She died peacefully, she died in her sleep," he repeated as if trying to convince himself. David did not give in, he took a step forward and continued. "But why was Hannah alone? And why were you the first to find her? Doesn't that seem a little odd to you? The murmur among the people had become even louder, a mix of curiosity and unease spreading through the church. Children, with wide eyes, watched, not fully understanding what was going on, while some adults whispered among themselves, making the atmosphere even more tense. Father Michael's face turned red, an expression of barely concealed rage spreading across it. He stamped his foot on the floor, silencing everyone once again. "This is nonsense," he shouted, his voice almost a scream. "You are creating chaos at such a sacred moment, disrespecting the memory of such a beloved woman." With a trembling finger he pointed at David. "Leave this place now, you and that dog," he ordered. His voice was authoritarian, but with a palpable tension in each word. "We will not hear another word from you in this place." David hesitated for a moment, but then Duke, standing next to him, emitted a loud bark, as if challenging the father and giving David the impetus to continue. In response to the rejection, David realized he'd touched upon something significant, something that the father didn't want anyone to uncover. Still, he knew at that moment that he had no other option. He turned around slowly, took hold of Duke's leash, and with a final defiant look towards the father, started to walk towards the door. As the whispers of those around him became louder, everyone watched, in shock at what was happening. Outside the church, David felt the weight of the curious and suspicious stares of the community, but he couldn't just leave everything behind. There was a deep and dark mystery surrounding Hannah's death, and a strong intuition compelled him to keep going. Duke seemed to share this feeling, wagging his tail enthusiastically, as if ready for whatever was ahead. "Let's go, buddy," David whispered to the dog. "I think we have a lot to uncover." And so they started their investigation. As they walked through the cemetery, among the trees and old tombstones, the cold wind blew, the leaves dancing, making a sound that resembled whispers, in an eerie silence. David looked around, more and more sure that this place was hiding something mysterious. Duke was sniffing the ground restlessly, as if looking for something specific. He seemed to be guided by an almost supernatural intuition, knowing exactly where to go. Determined to follow the clues, David concluded that the first step was to learn more about Hannah's life. He made his way towards Hannah's house, a small stone house surrounded by a garden, forgotten by time, at the edge of the woods. When he got there, he found the door open, as if someone had left in a hurry, leaving behind more questions than answers. Entering the house, David felt a chill run down his spine. The house was dusty, but it was evident that some things had been moved recently. While Duke roamed around sniffing, David began to explore every corner, opening drawers, shuffling through papers and documents. Then, on an old desk, he found a small wooden box. Inside, there were yellowed letters and photographs. Reading the letters, he realized that Hannah had been hiding many secrets. The letters mentioned secret meetings and conversations that Hannah had with people outside of the village. But what made his heart beat faster was a private letter written by Hannah. In the letter, she mentioned Father Michael, and revealed that she had discovered some very serious things about him. David exchanged a look with Duke. He felt they were close to something significant. As he continued his search, David found a small key taped behind one of the frames on the wall. "What does this key open?" he murmured to himself. Duke let out a short bark, as if encouraging David to continue. Next to the key, there was a photograph. Hannah was next to Father Michael, with the church in the background. But what caught David's attention the most was a detail in the bottom of the picture, a small metal box, identical to the box that Hannah mentioned in her letters and said that the father was using to store money. "We're on the right track, Duke," David said, petting the dog. "If Hannah was trying to tell us something about the father, perhaps this key is the answer we need." Holding the small key in his hands, David knew that he was closer than ever to uncovering the truth. Together with Duke, he decided to go back to the center of the village, where they could continue their investigation. The town seemed quiet, but David felt that behind that silence there was something dark hiding. He needed to understand the secrets that Hannah had been keeping and exactly what she knew about Father Michael. With that in mind, David went to the town library, an old place full of dusty bookshelves and ancient documents. He began looking for something that could connect Hannah and Father Michael to something unusual. After searching for a while, he found an old photo album of the town. As he turned the pages, he saw photos of community events, religious festivals, and finally photos of Hannah. One of them immediately caught his attention. It was a photo of Hannah next to Father Michael. But what stood out the most was the expression on her face, unease, as if she knew something that was deeply scaring her. What had Hannah discovered? She didn't look happy, she looked worried. It was then that David noticed a detail, almost imperceptible, in the edges of the photo. A small metal box, just like the one he saw in the photo he found at Hannah's house. His curiosity growing, David, determined to follow the clues to the end, returned home. Once back home, he continued searching for more evidence and found a hidden cabinet behind an old curtain. Inside, there was Hannah's diary. The pages were full of notes that seemed incredibly important. David, with Duke by his side, as if the dog could also feel the tension in the air, began to read quickly. The notes revealed something dark. Hannah had discovered a network of corruption within the church. She mentioned that Father Michael had been stealing money from the congregation and using it for a secret purpose, accumulating large amounts of money. David read every line, his heart beating fast, absorbing every word. He's stealing from everyone and using people's trust to cover up his crimes, Hannah had written on one of the pages. Between the pages of the diary, he found an envelope containing more photographs. In some of the photos, Father Michael was seen carrying that same small metal box in hidden places inside the church. In one of the photos, he was standing next to an old statue inside the church, with the box next to him, giving the impression that he was hiding something under the sacred figure. A chill ran down David's spine. "That's it," he murmured to himself, as if speaking to Duke. She discovered everything, and that's why she was in danger. David knew now that he needed to find that metal box inside the church. It was probably the key to understanding the entire mystery. He looked at Duke, who was wagging his tail, as if ready for the next step. "Come on, boy, we're going to uncover a big secret," said David, with renewed determination. The situation was much more serious than he could have imagined. With all these findings, the truth about what was really going on in that small village was about to surface. Holding Hannah's diary in his hands, David felt the weight of every word, every revelation, as if he was carrying a burden that he could only release by uncovering the truth. He knew he had to go back to the church, to the place where all of these secrets intertwined. With Duke by his side, David walked through the narrow village streets, each step increasing his adrenaline and determination. He was determined to find that metal box that Hannah had mentioned in her notes. It held the key to everything, waiting to be discovered. Reaching the church, David looked around to make sure that no one was following him. The church was silent, the doors slightly ajar, and the interior was shrouded in shadows. Cautiously, accompanied by Duke, he entered and started to investigate. He remembered the photo he had seen. The metal box was hidden under one of the old statues. Slowly, he walked towards the statue of the saint that was standing in a secluded corner of the church. The stone figure observed everyone with a solemn and almost severe gaze, as if guarding something important. David kneeled and began to feel the base of the statue with trembling hands, looking for a sign of a hiding place. Then he felt it. There was something. David pulled back a small piece of fabric that covered the base of the statue, hidden in the shadows, and there it was, the metal box that Hannah had mentioned in her diary. His heart was beating fast, and he glanced at Duke, who was wagging his tail as if to say, "We are on the right track." Holding the box in his hands, David felt its cold, heavy surface. Carefully, he opened the lid, and what he saw inside made his breath catch. It was all bundles of cash, rolled up and tied with labels indicating donations and tithes from the church's congregation. But that wasn't all. Underneath the money, there was a small key. David picked it up and examined it in the dim light filtering through the church windows. A key, David murmured thoughtfully, but what does it open? It was then that he noticed a piece of yellowed paper, folded and hidden under the money. Carefully he took it out and opened it. It was a map, and in the center was a place marked with a red circle. Next to the circle was written church storage. David immediately understood. The key must open a hidden storage inside the church. This must have been the place where Hannah discovered something. He thought, with a mix of fear and hope. He knew he needed to move quickly. Gripping the key tightly in his hand, he looked at Duke and said, "Come on, buddy, we need to find that storage." They stood up and together they started looking through every corner of the church, determined to uncover the mystery that had been hidden up until now. Carefully following the map, David felt the church growing increasingly silent, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Holding the key and map tightly, he and Duke advanced towards the place indicated in the paper. The map led them to a small door hidden behind the altar, one that very few people knew existed. A chill ran down David's spine as he approached. The air was even colder, laden with a dark presence, as if something evil was hidden in that place. He put the key inside the lock, took a deep breath, and turned it. The door opened with a creak, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into a dark basement. Holding a flashlight, casting a shaky light, David began to descend the stairs, with Duke following close behind him, listening to every strange sound. At the bottom of the stairs, they found a dark, shadowy corridor, illuminated by a dim light that cast erratic shadows on the stone walls. Then David heard a sound, the sound of chains. "Hannah," he called out in a whisper, but the only thing he heard was his own voice echoing through the emptiness. As he entered the room, illuminated by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, he saw her, tied to a chair, pale but alive. "Hannah!" David shouted, relieved. And she responded, in a weak voice, "David," taking a breath of relief. But before he could reach her, he heard heavy footsteps behind him. Turning around, he saw Father Michael, holding a wooden plank tightly in his hand, his eyes gleaming with rage. "You shouldn't be here," the father shouted, his voice distorted by anger. "I told you, you would never find Hannah." David barely managed to dodge the father, who tried to hit him with the plank. The plank brushed against him, making him lose his balance and fall to the ground. He raised his hands, trying to defend himself, a single question running through his mind: how could a father do such a thing? It was unbelievable. Seeing that David had fallen, the father was about to strike again, but Duke, without hesitating, jumped at the father, emitting a fierce bark, and bit his leg with all his might. The father's scream of pain echoed off the walls of the basement. He tried to get free from Duke, but the dog was determined to protect his friend, and he wouldn't let go. In desperation, the father dropped the plank, and began to limp away, trying to escape and call for help. David got up quickly, his heart racing, and ran after him. He can't escape, he thought, he knew the truth needed to come to light. While Duke was still chasing Father Michael, the commotion had already started to draw the residents out of their houses. People were watching in shock, seeing Father Michael, a man that was supposed to be respected and honored, in a desperate struggle with David, with Duke holding him in check. Taking advantage of that moment, David raised his voice and shouted, "Stop! Everyone needs to hear what is really happening. Everyone must know the truth." While the father tried to escape, David quickly explained everything he had discovered: the box full of stolen money, Hannah's kidnapping, and Father Michael's hidden crimes. Shock spread across the faces of the villagers who couldn't believe what they were hearing. Desperate, Father Michael tried to run, but Duke held him firmly in place until some of the village men helped to subdue him. As the father was finally being arrested, David knew it was time to present the evidence. He led the group back to the church and, with his hands still trembling, he opened the metal box in front of everyone. The villagers' eyes widened as they saw the stolen money, and they looked at the map of the secret storage where the father had been hiding his illicit activities. Now there was no more room for doubt. the truth had finally surfaced. David then took everyone to the storage, where Hannah was still waiting, scared, to be released. The relief on her face was evident, and Duke, as if feeling that his mission was complete, wagged his tail happily, as if he knew his friend was safe. The mystery seemed to be finally solved, with Father Michael incapacitated and the proof of his crimes in plain sight. The entire village was in shock, marveling at what had been revealed. But David knew that Father Michael was not one to give up easily. As the villagers were discussing what they should do, the father, in desperation, took advantage of a moment of distraction, broke free from those who were holding him. With an expression of deep hatred, he grabbed a piece of wood from the floor and ran towards David, with his eyes gleaming with rage, yelling with a voice full of hatred, "You don't understand anything. You should never have gotten involved." David was caught off guard, watching the father coming at him with the piece of wood raised in a threatening manner. For a moment he froze, struggling to process the surreal scene of a father acting with such violence. However, before the blow landed, Duke reacted. With a powerful leap, the dog bit Father Michael's leg, and his scream echoed in the street. The father fell to the ground, struggling to get free from the dog, while David rushed to his aid. He tried to pull the father away from Duke, and the two of them rolled on the floor in a fierce struggle, the shouting and barking filling the air. Desperate, Father Michael managed to break free from Duke for a brief moment, and began to limp away, running towards the main square of the village. But Duke didn't give up. He chased the father determinedly, barking loudly, and soon reached him. In the middle of the square, with another leap, Duke knocked Father Michael to the ground, preventing him from escaping. Now, the neighbors who had gathered watched the scene in astonishment. No one could imagine that Father Michael, a man that was supposed to symbolize goodness and faith, would be found in such a degrading and desperate state. David, still breathless, approached the crowd, and started telling them in detail all that he had discovered. People listened carefully as he explained that Hannah had learned that Father Michael had been stealing the congregation's donations, using the money for a secret purpose. He also shared how the father planned to kidnap Hannah to prevent her from telling the truth. Some of the shocked villagers helped hold Father Michael, while David, determined to prove that he was telling the truth, led them back to the church. There, he held the small metal box tightly, feeling not only its contents, but also the weight of the truth that he was about to reveal in front of everyone. He opened the box and showed the bundles of money, organized and labeled with the names of those who had donated. Shock spread through the people, whispering to each other in disbelief, not believing they were seeing proof of the father's crime. David then showed them the key he had found, and explained that it led to a secret storage inside the church. With the crowd following him, he took them to the storage, where Hannah was still waiting, still tied up, though now looking relieved. Everyone there felt a sensation of relief and astonishment, seeing her alive, and Duke wagging his tail happily as if he knew his friend was safe. That scene was touching, and everyone watched, moved and relieved, seeing Hannah back and the truth brought to light. Exposed, Father Michael tried to justify himself, but nobody wanted to listen to his excuses. The once loyal and trusting community now saw him for who he truly was. The father's words didn't matter anymore. Everyone had seen the truth with their own eyes. David and Duke had exposed the dark side of someone they would have never suspected. With the father finally arrested, and the whole truth known to the community, the mystery was solved, and justice had been served. Hannah thanked David and Duke for risking everything to save her and reveal the truth. Father Michael was taken away by the police, while the village, still in shock, began to rebuild itself on new foundations of transparency and trust. Realizing the dark secrets that had been hidden, the residents came together to return to a place that was committed to truth and honesty. David, who had risked so much to uncover the truth, decided to stay in the village. He chose to help Hannah recover, and finding a new purpose there, he became a part of the community. David's friendship and courage touched everyone, and he became an important part of the town. His loyal companion, Duke, was celebrated as a true local hero. Children gathered around him, adults petted him, and the entire village appreciated the dog's role in revealing the truth. United by sacrifice and courage, the villagers found a fresh start with a new spirit and commitment to truth that would strengthen them in the future. Thank you so much for following the story until the end. If you liked the story and the bravery of Duke and David, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your participation is very important to us.